Hello, everybody, to this last session on our EFIB conference today. So this day was totally focused on food innovation, and in this webinar we are touching a bit more on cellular agriculture, next-gen fermentation, and the overall field of plant innovation. And we are happy to have a whole broad agenda of experts in the field, and also that some experts and companies from the US are joining for this meeting as well. So as we are a European forum for industrial biotech and bioeconomy, we are in normal times more focusing on European challenges and stakeholders. But as this meeting is, as every other meeting now taking place virtually, we are really pleased to have a more broader speaker panels here and also include US perspectives. And I think maybe then later in the discussion, there could be also a bit a sharing of the different perspectives and markets requirements. So I will not talk much anymore. I'm Sandrine from the organization team, but I will hand over to our moderator for this session. It's Sandrine Lauret. She works for the quite newly established European Alliance of Plant-Based Food. And yeah, so it's your stage now. I leave it to you to go through the panel, and then, yeah, great discussion.
Thank you very much, Sandra, and welcome to all of you. More than happy to be chairing this panel, and we have some of the most distinguished speakers on board to talk about innovation in food, and especially in alternatives to animal-based products. So as Sandra mentioned, we'll talk about cellular agriculture, next generation fermentation, plant-based food innovation. So great discussions to look forward to. To set the scene a little bit and tell you a bit more about me and about the European Alliance for Plant-Based Foods, who I'm representing today. We are, yes, I can move the slide, that's good. So we are indeed newly created. We exist since August this year. And the European Alliance for Plant-Based Food is in fact a multi-stakeholder alliance, so representing the entire plant-based value chain. So we really make the connection and gather together representatives from the food industry, food producers, manufacturers, NGOs, nutritionists, researchers, and consumers as well, who will be represented in our membership, as you can see on this slide. And our mission is really focused, which is to make sure that plant-based foods can and do play a role in the transition to more sustainable and healthy food systems. I think we are all aware that behaviors are changing, that consumers in society are becoming more and more aware of the impact of our current food systems and diets have on the environment, but also on health. And we do see this transition at different levels of society, and also some ambitious initiatives coming up at political level as well. In the European Union, we now have the Farm to Fork strategy, which also acknowledges the role of plant-based diets in climate change mitigation and adaptation. So this is already a great step forward. Now, our objective as the Alliance for Plant-Based Foods is to make sure that this Farm to Fork becomes a reality. And this is very much what drives our priorities, which is to make sure that consumers have access to plant-based foods, and that they are well equipped to identify those foods and know exactly what they are about, to make sure that there's also fair market access, because it is one thing to promote innovation and breakthrough innovation in a sector, and it's another to make sure that those innovations have true access to the market. So research innovation is another priority. And sustainable foods also means sustainable production. And our mission, in connection to our mission, we really want to make sure that we have a strong regulatory framework at European level that will help not only make some space for plant-based foods, but that will also boost and speed up its access to the market. And this means, when it comes to consumers, making sure that there is clear labeling of plant-based foods, that there is also a solid framework for sustainability claims. For instance, when it comes to market access, what we want is to make sure that we have a harmonized framework for plant-based food labeling across Europe, so that we compare apples and apples, if I may say, and that the rules also around food denomination are clear. At the moment in the European Parliament, we have a strong debate going on about whether, about some discussions to potentially prevent meat names on non-animal-based products, which would be at odds with this ambition of farm to fork strategy. Another objective when it comes to supporting and really enabling plant-based foods is research and innovation. There is a lot of innovation happening in the food sector at the moment, and that has enabled this plant-based alternatives. But there's still much more to do, and there's still greater potential, and I'm sure we'll hear about it in a minute. And when it comes to sustainable food production practices, also enticing sustainable foods through public procurement. Those are different types of solutions that we could see could also support innovation and developments in this particular segment of the food industry. And this is exactly what we are advocating for through the European Alliance for Plant-Based Foods. I'm more than happy to chair this panel today on behalf of the Alliance and on behalf of our team as well, Siska Poti couldn't make it to this panel, but she's our Secretary General. And Sylvia Looney, my colleague as well, supporting the Secretariat. Without further ado, I suggest that we dive into the different aspects of innovation that we are here to talk about today, and I'm sure we will come back to some of the regulatory questions along the way. Our first speaker is Nate Crosser. Nate is working for the Good Food Institute, which promotes innovation and investments in alternative proteins. And Nate is a startup growth specialist, helping startups and investors scale up innovation and solutions for alternative proteins. But he will tell us more about that. Nate, the floor is yours.
All right, wonderful. We do have the wrong deck up. I think this is the next deck, but I can go ahead and get started with introducing myself. So it is a pleasure to be here with you all to provide a brief state of the industry on fermentation as it applies to alternative proteins. As Sandrine said, my name is Nate Crosser. I'm a startup growth specialist with the Good Food Institute, which is a nonprofit that acts as an accelerator for the alternative protein industry. That is, we support startups, governments, established corporations, researchers, students, investors, etc., to hasten the shift to a plant-based, cultivated, and fermentation-enabled food system where we make meat, eggs, and dairy produced without animals. And GFI does this because these alternative protein biotechnologies are finally allowing us to produce products that can compete with conventional animal products on the basis of taste and price, without the undeniable destructiveness of intensive animal agriculture. Are we able to get my deck up, or should I just keep going?
So can you see your slide right now? Just jumping in here from the organization team. Nate, can you see your?
Yeah.
Can you see your? Okay.
I see the EIT food deck right now.
Oh no, so maybe could you shortly refresh your browser, and then you should see your deck, because we can. Oh, maybe we have lost him. Okay, so now.
Yes.
Okay, so do you see now your slides?
Yes, now it's wanting access.
We can see your deck.
Yeah, so we can see your deck.
Okay, well, yeah, it's just not, please accept the dialog shown by your browser to publish the chosen device. Let me refresh.
Oh my God. So hopefully he comes back. So normally if someone is not seeing the deck, then it's refreshing the browser is helping a lot.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, yes. I for some reason it's not letting me access the dashboard now. Can I just stay next slide?
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, apologies. Next slide, please. Okay, so very briefly over the next 15 minutes, I hope to provide a primer on fermentation within the alternative protein context. I'll start with the role of fermentation in the industry, then the ways that fermentation technology is applied, peek at the technology value chain, and an overview of the competitive and investment landscape. Next slide, please. So all these incredible new products you're seeing here are produced without animals. All pictured were actually launched in the last year, and all of these products are also enabled by fermentation. In fact, several of the products come from the category leading companies who are members on this panel. But before I get ahead of myself, next slide, please. What is fermentation? Fermentation has been used to mean various things in different contexts, but GFI employs a broad scope and defines fermentation as the use of single-cell fungi, mycelium, bacteria, microalgae, and other microbes as a bioproduction platform to modify or produce proteins, lipids, or other functional ingredients. Now, this definition isn't perfect and probably isn't entirely clear at this point, but it is our best attempt to capture a broad range of technologies that use somewhat similar set of production technologies and organisms. Some historical context may help. Next slide, please. Well, this is a new area we see emerging within the alt protein context. The use of fermentation within the food, pharmaceutical, chemical, and biofuel sectors is well established. Fermentation has a particularly long history in food production. Beer, leavened bread, tempeh, kimchi, and many ancient staples all exist thanks to rudimentary fermentation methods. In recent decades, modern technology has empowered these microbes to create functional food processing agents and ingredients like enzymes. For example, fermentation-derived chymosin has replaced rennet, formerly sourced from calf stomachs, as a primary coagulant in modern cheese production. Most people today are already regularly consuming products that rely on fermentation. Regarding animal-free meat, British brand Corn has been selling its fermentation-derived mycoprotein meat since the 1980s. It just wasn't until the last several years that more pioneers entered the space. Next slide, please. GFI thinks of fermentation as fitting into three equally exciting categories: traditional fermentation, biomass fermentation, and precision fermentation. This will make more sense in a moment after I've defined these terms, but note the lines between these categories is not also clear, always clear. Also note the industry needs consumer research studies on nomenclature, and we don't think that these are the consumer-facing terms that companies would go to market with. We've seen fungi-based microflora, culinary microorganisms, plant-based, and other terms used to describe one or more of these categories. When companies go to market or through the regulatory process, they will likely use different terms based on their precise technology, geography, and consumer research results. More on these three categories. Next slide, please. First is traditional fermentation. This refers to using intact live microorganisms to modulate and process plant-derived ingredients, resulting in products with unique flavor, nutritional profiles, and texture. Examples are using the fungus Rhizopus to ferment soybeans into tempeh and various lactic acid bacteria to produce cheese and yogurt, both animal and plant-based. Innovative applications of this concept include Mycotechnology Corp's use of shiitake mushroom mycelium to ferment rice and pea to create a plant-based protein with improved flavor and functionality. A subsidiary of the world's largest meat company, JBS, called Plantera, has recently used Mycotechnology's protein for their new line of animal-free meat. Please. The second category is biomass fermentation. That is, to produce standalone edible protein. Biomass fermentation leverages the fast growth and high protein content of many microorganisms to efficiently produce large quantities of protein from various feedstocks. This biomass can then serve as the predominant ingredient of a food product. That biomass, particularly filamentous fungi and mycelium, can also be used to provide 3D structure and other functionality to products, allowing plant-based products to move beyond ground formats like burgers to whole cuts like steak and bacon. A familiar example is corn, but there is an emerging crop of rapidly growing companies in this space, including Atlast Food Co. and Nature's Fynd, whose CEOs are with us today. Next slide, please. The third category is precision fermentation. This approach uses microbial hosts, often yeast or bacteria, as cell factories for producing specific functional ingredients. These functional ingredients improve the sensory characteristics and functional attributes of the products they are used in. Although production can be capital intensive, these ingredients likely make up a small part of the mass of an end product. They can be proteins, enzymes, flavoring agents, vitamins, pigments, or fats. Prominent examples include Perfect Day's dairy proteins being used for animal-free ice cream, as well as Impossible Foods' heme flavorant and colorant produced in yeast with recombinant soy DNA. Next slide, please. So there are many more ways to conceptualize or cut the fermentation industry than traditional biomass and precision, and this mind map shows a few of them. For example, you could categorize the companies by whether they use liquid state fermentation in a bioreactor or solid state fermentation in trays in a warehouse. You could also look at the type of organism doing the fermenting. There are several taxonomic kingdoms at play here. Or you could look to the feedstock feeding the metabolism. It could be glucose, grain, carbon dioxide, methane, sunlight, or waste streams. Or you could look at the business strategy the company is taking, or where along the value chain they are focused. And all this is not to mention the end product formats that are being created. There are over 1 trillion species of microbes in the world, and it seems like that many food products. Combine that with the versatility of the fermentation production platforms, and the possibilities are nearly endless. Next slide, please. So I will just briefly zoom out to situate fermentation within the broader alt protein context. GFI sees fermentation as a key pillar of the alternative protein industry. In addition to fermentation, which is essentially cellular agriculture with non-animal cells, although there are exceptions. We can make meat, eggs, and dairy with animal cells in a bioreactor, which we call cultivated, clean, or cell-based meat. We can also use make those products directly from plants, utilizing the biodiversity of the plant kingdom, the current agricultural system, and advanced food science. Next slide, please. Fermentation is not in competition or conflict with these sectors, although fermentation can be used as a standalone protein source, such as in the case of biomass. In most instances, it will be used symbiotically with plant-based protein and cultivated meat. For example, a biomass fermentation steak may utilize plant-based flavors like coconut aminos or cell-based fat from cultivated pork. Perhaps even more common will be fermentation-derived ingredients going into cultivated meat production, such as the growth factors in the cell culture media, which is the liquid broth that the cells grow in the bioreactor, or as a functional ingredient in or processing aid in a mostly plant-based product. Next slide, please. Ultimately, we may not see 3 alternative protein production platforms as distinct industry segments, but rather as one large industry where we produce animal product alternatives across the spectrum, utilizing ingredients from one or more technology. A clear example of this is in plant-based meat. The Impossible Burger is mostly plant-based, but uses fermentation to produce heme, the signature ingredient that gives it that bloody appearance and meaty taste that sets it apart. Next slide, please. Fermentation is already enabling a new generation of biomimicked whole-cut meats, egg replacements, ice creams, cheeses, nuggets, patties, seafood products, particularly those utilizing microalgae, and pet foods, particularly those utilizing yeasts. Many of these products are already being produced by fermentation companies directly, but to an even greater extent by fermentation companies selling proteins, lipids, and other functional ingredients to end product manufacturers. Currently, about 2/3 of fermentation companies are pursuing these B2B strategies that are described. Next slide, please. So a quick case study on dairy. Perfect Day was formed in 2014 and was the first company to make real milk proteins, casein and whey, for food applications using microbes rather than animals. In late 2018, Perfect Day commercialized their ingredients through a joint development agreement with global agri-food company Archer Daniels Midland. They received FDA approval for their protein in 2019, and by the end of 2019, Perfect Day had raised over $360 million and are scaling up rapidly. In early 2020, Perfect Day partnered with the Urgent Company to start a new animal-free ice cream brand, Brave Robot, selling direct-to-consumer, which I'm sure we'll hear more about in a few minutes. Perfect Day is one of a handful of companies now working in this space, all taking unique approaches in terms of target compounds, business model, and go-to-market strategy, such as the company New Culture going after cheese applications first. Next slide, please. So I'd be remiss to not talk about the tremendous opportunities for additional companies and researchers to get involved. While fermentation is itself a relatively mature platform, significant opportunity for innovation and investment exists at every process step, which I'll touch on now briefly. To oversimplify, the process involves choosing a target protein like casein, whey, or mycoprotein, then finding or engineering a host strain like a yeast to produce that protein efficiently, then building a bioreactor or other system for that microorganism to proliferate in, then harvest and process it, and then use that resulting compound in a food science process. I'll briefly highlight some of the key areas along this value chain that would benefit from investment. Next slide, please. First is identifying the molecule of interest. It might be the next heme, a dairy protein like whey, a muscle protein like actin or myosin, lipids, or fungal biomass. We've yet to map the proteome or secretome of animal products, so we still don't have a perfect understanding yet of what makes meat meaty at a molecular level. So that's to say there are still many targets we've even yet to discover, let alone pursue. Second is developing a microbe that can produce the target ingredient. Historically, it has been bacteria or single-cell fungi, but it could be microalgae, protists, or even mushrooms and plants themselves. Third is utilizing a feedstock or nutrient source. This has enormous implications for both cost and sustainability, in addition to impacting the growth and composition and therefore flavor of the microbes themselves. While fermentation has historically relied on sugars as feedstocks, there is huge potential to leverage lower cost inputs such as processing side streams from other industries or even from other alternative protein platforms. Companies are exploring ways to utilize unconventional feedstocks such as agricultural residues like starches or side streams from bioethanol refineries. But the field has still barely scratched the surface of what is possible. Fourth is bioprocess design and capacity building. In order to meet demand for all proteins, we need to scale up the innovative products being developed. The largest fermentation facilities in the world were built for other industries, such as industrial enzymes, animal feed ingredients, breweries, or bioethanol. And the largest facilities for alternative protein fermentation are orders of magnitude smaller than animal meat processing facilities. Thus, there's an immense room for capital influx simply to scale up or retrofit manufacturing capacity and infrastructure. Lastly is product development. These improvements can be garnered through process innovations. For example, the texture of corn's products is imparted in part through a freezing process that compresses the delicate fungal filaments into bundles that more closely resemble muscle fibers, and also through product formulation optimization, perfecting the mixture of ingredients in the order in which they are combined. As with all alternative protein products, products derived from fermentation stand to gain wider market adoption and competitive advantage by simply appealing to more consumers through improvements in attributes like flavor and texture, as well as being served in culturally relevant product formats. So next slide, please. This is a long one. I'll end with a snapshot of where we're at in the industry. The industry is still very young. Of the 44 companies that GFI has identified that are focused on alternative protein applications for fermentation, 4 and 5 formed since 2015, with a median founding date or year in 2018. In 2019 alone, 14 companies formed in this space. These 44 total companies exist across 16 countries, with approximately half in the United States and the second largest cluster being in the EU. Of the 44 companies, we've categorized 18 as biomass, 21 as precision, and 5 as traditional fermentation. Next slide, please. Seeing the opportunity, several of the largest food and life science companies in the world, including DuPont, Novozymes, and DSM, are now also developing fermentation-based product lines and solutions tailored to the alternative protein industry. There are at least another 23 companies with business lines in the space. Next slide, please. Investment in the sector has been red hot. fermentation companies focused on alternative proteins have raised more than $837 million in venture capital funding to date. Globally, in 2019, fermentation companies raised $274 million, which is 3.5 times more than the capital invested in cultivated meat companies worldwide, and almost 60% as much as the US plant-based meat, egg, and dairy companies raised during that period. Next slide, please. Looking in more detail at the announced amount raised just by alternative protein companies, we can see that the sector has already raised significantly more capital in the first half of 2020 than in all of 2019. And you can see how substantial the segment's growth was in 2019 compared to 2018 and every year prior. In fact, 85% of this funding was raised in 2019 and the first half of 2020 alone. Next slide. Fermentation companies have drawn funding from at least 180 unique investors. The top 5 most active investors in the space are shown to the left. For comparison, ag tech companies generally have secured more than 5,800 investors per pitch book. Although this is a small field, which is natural for a nascent industry, it includes Louis Dreyfus Co., Bunge, Kellogg, ADM, Danone, Kraft Heinz, Mars, Tyson, SOSV, Viking Global, Thiel Capital, Breakthrough Energy Ventures, Mayfield Fund, and specialist funds have formed like New Crop Capital, Blue Horizon Ventures, CPT Capital, and Purple Orange Ventures, and Stray Dog Capital. Total investors in fermentation companies span 19 countries across 5 continents. Half of these investors are headquartered in the United States, and the next largest concentration of investors is in Europe, with 63 investors across 12 countries. Next slide, please. Although there are regulatory difficulties with novel foods, particularly in Europe, governments of innovative countries across the world have already begun to support the fermentation industry as a solution to food sovereignty, food security, and environmental goals like emissions reductions. The US and Israel have supported fermentation companies through grants and accelerator programs, but I wanted to briefly highlight one case study in Europe, Scottish startup 3F Bio. After receiving an investment from EIT Food, the EU Food Innovation Incubator, 3F Bio, alongside a consortium of other companies, received a €17 million grant from the EU Horizon 2020 program to develop a zero-waste biorefinery to produce food-grade protein from low-cost, sustainable feedstocks. The project, called Plenitude, brings together 3F Bio, a bioethanol refinery, Bridge to Food Incubator, Mosa Meat, a cultivated meat company, Wageningen University, IFF Flavor House, Alco Group, and others. Next slide, please. Here are just a few takeaways for reference. You should have these slides available to you after the presentation. And I will just end by saying that much of the insights, next slide, please, sorry. Much of the insights from this presentation are pulled from the Good Food Institute's new State of the Industry report on fermentation. And additionally, we have similar reports on cultivated meat and plant-based meat, eggs, and dairy. All of these reports can be downloaded for free at gfi.org/industry. And then we also actually have a free symposium on fermentation coming up on October 20th, which you can find out more about on our website at gfi.org. And that is also remote. And then you can just go to my final slide that has my contact information. If you want to get a hold of me, my email is here. You can also feel free to add me on LinkedIn. Let me know if GFI can be of any assistance. Thank you. Sorry for the technical difficulties there.
No worries. Thank you very much, Nate, for this very insightful presentation and hints on fermentation processes. Do we already have questions from the floor, from participants?
Yeah, no, I can't see the chat or the screen right now, so I'll have to ask me.
I can have access to it, so that's okay. And for the moment, we have great presentation, Nate. So that is very good.
Easiest question.
Perhaps I would have a first question to you now. If you have other questions coming up, don't worry, we will have a discussion session after all the presentations. Sure. Just for now, coming back to the slides where you present the key opportunities in innovation in 5 steps, I was wondering whether there are some steps where you see more potential for innovation, or whether it's really plenty along the way.
Yeah, I mean, they're all absolutely necessary. I think at this point, the greatest white space remains formulation and product development. So that last stage, we just, there are a few companies that have developed really great products, but we need, hundreds, if not thousands of great products in the market. And then once, we have those, we can start optimizing the processes to bring price down and make taste better. But as of right now, the vast majority of markets are not being served by this technology at all. Companies are launching in the US or Singapore, but there's so many other markets that need to be tapped and product categories still.
Okay. We also have a question from Martin, who asks, what services can you offer startups that are not yet in the fermentation area?
Yeah, GFI has a whole bunch of free resources like our startup manual. These reports help people hopefully find their business opportunity. We've got other resources that have kind of like systematic lists of business opportunities. We're happy to provide one-on-one support if needed. So really, I just urge anyone who's interested to go to gfi.org, start poking around, or reach out to me, and I can share resources.
Thank you very much, Nate. And also for other questions specifically about GFI and the kind of support you offer to startups and else, they can also get a hold of you after the session because you will be in the chat afterwards.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I think we can move to the next speaker, who is Dr. Georg Schirrmacher. Apologies for mispronunciation. Dr. Schirrmacher has long-standing experience in bioeconomy issues and bio-based initiatives. He is currently the director of EIT Food Co-location Center in Munich. Facilitating collaboration between academia and businesses to really boost innovation in the food chain. And he will talk to us about a new food system for Europe. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Sandrine, for this kind introduction. Really a pleasure to be here this afternoon. And let me use the first few minutes to talk about the institute I'm working for. So I'm working for the European Institute for Innovation and Technology. And this is an European agency which is based in Budapest. It was founded in 2008 with the aim to bring innovations faster to the market. And at the moment, we have 8 of the so-called knowledge and innovation communities, and that's the basic model of operation. So every mega innovation topic that is identified by the EIT community is transferred into knowledge innovation communities, and we have one for climate, one for digital, one for raw materials, one for energy, one for health, and the new kids on the block are for manufacturing and urban mobility. You see, it's all the big transformative topics we have at the moment, and I am representing EIT Food today. So what is EIT Food? We are here to transform the food system. This is the thing we want to do. And how are we doing this? We will see in a few minutes. We are an ecosystem for solving the complex societal challenges by deploying innovative solutions. So we say alternatives in the market, startups, education, innovation is the answer. And we have the answer transferred into the biggest consumer-centric open science innovation ecosystem that I am aware of at the moment. So cooperation is the key. As all big units, we have a pretty straightforward vision and mission. And our vision is a world where everybody can access and enjoy a sustainable, safe, and healthy food with trust and fairness from farm to food, from farm to fork. So this brings us back to the farm to fork strategy. You will see this later on. And the mission is to transform how food is produced and valued by the European society, solving the biggest innovation challenges through trusted industry, education, and research partners working with informed and engaged citizens. So the network and the heterogeneity of our network is the key. To make this even more visible, I'm here with a video I would like to show you, and I would like to ask the organizers to start a video, and you as participants need to accept the video window, and then that's popping up, and then you can watch it. Enjoy.
We need to future-proof our food. Why? Because the world population is expected to reach almost 10 billion by 2050. And currently, we are facing many demographic, environmental, and health issues that are threatening the future of our food system. Today, almost 1 billion people go hungry globally, while twice that number eat too much of the wrong foods. Food production accounts for up to 30% of global greenhouse gas emissions, 40% of global land use, and 70% of freshwater consumption. To make matters worse, we waste almost a third of our food globally. We believe that we are all responsible for and connected to the food that we eat, so we all need to work together to improve it. At EIT Food, we're building an inclusive and innovative community where the consumer is actively involved, so that we can deliver an innovative food sector that produces healthy and sustainable food, trusted by society. And how are we doing this? By creating and scaling up agri-food startups, by developing talents and leaders to transform the food system, by launching new innovative products and ingredients to deliver healthier and more sustainable food, and engaging the public so that they can become the agents of change in the food system. Let's build the future of food together. If you'd like to learn more about how we are transforming the food system, our projects, and to get involved, then please go to www.eitfood.eu. Look forward to seeing you there.
Okay. So if you are interested in the video or in more information, basically available in YouTube, you're all encouraged to look for us and Google us, or go to YouTube and just put in EIT Food. We are one of the first hits you will see. So as we are the largest open innovation initiative transforming the current food systems, and you have seen the needs why we need to transform these food systems, we have translated the needs into our strategic goals. As you can see on the left side, we have the strategic goals, like we want to overcome low consumer trust in their food. We are going to create a consumer valued food for a healthier nutrition. We are building a consumer-centric connected food system, and we enhance sustainability through resource stewardship. So everyone is responsible, the producers and the consumers and the innovators, to put up a resource stewardship. We want to overcome skills gaps, so we're educating to engage, innovate, and advance, and attract new talent to the food sector so that we are prepared for the future developments. And as we have seen, we are out there to overcome the limited entrepreneurial culture. So a catalyst in the food sector for entrepreneurship and innovation. And Nate, thank you for this example of 3F Bio. So this is one of our rising food stars, and we have had them in our funding. And that's one pillar, it's business creation. And as you can see, we are all over Europe with 5 different co-location centers, and all of the co-location centers are adapted to one of our strategic objectives. And you can see here that our strategic goals, our strategic objectives are translated and result into 6 focus areas. Namely, there are circular food systems, there are targeted nutrition, there are alternative proteins, the example of fermentation we have just seen, digitalization, traceability is important, sustainable aquaculture, and sustainability in agriculture. And the new Farm to Fork strategy that is now there for the next years really reflects the 6 focus areas and our strategic goals. And we are really proud and happy to be really a primus inter pares in this kind of Farm to Fork strategy. As I said, every co-location center is responsible for different sectors and different focus areas. The Innovation Hub I am heading, responsible for Germany, Austria, and the Netherlands, but doing pan-European projects all over Europe. We are responsible for sustainable agriculture and circular food systems. So the slides are available. You can have them after the session, I think tomorrow on the download section, and if you can look for the more detail. So how do we work? Mainly, we have project-based innovations. And on the one hand, we do programmatic innovations and programmatic projects, like we are founded as well on a national level by the Federal Ministry of Education and Research, where we, together with the ministry, aim to transform the food system into a more sustainable, healthy, and trusted system by networking with all the players along the whole food value chain. This reminds me of your presentation, Sandrine. You say as well, we need to work together to make this all a success. And business models and sustainable projects are the core of that. At the same time, we even go more regional and make this complementary to the pan-European assets. We work with Bavaria, with the Ministry of Economics, and we are there to develop a new ecosystem in the field of entrepreneurship that enables startups to grow, that we enable startups to build in the agriculture and technology sector. So this is our programmatic approach. At the same time, we are founding and we are funding innovation projects that have the potential to change and transform the food system. And for each focus area, I did bring examples, like in the focus area of sustainability in agriculture, we have a project that is done by University of Hohenheim, John Deere and Group YM. And this is a detection and actuation system for weed management, so that we can apply herbicide treatment where it's needed and not on the whole field, but only in spots where it's really needed. So saving pesticides. Alternative proteins is another focus area, and we have a project called Valocake. It's done by the German Institute of Deutsches Institut für Lebensmitteltechnologie, Technische Universität München, and NAPI Fern. And here we focus on rape seeds and as a byproduct of oil pressing. And then we are looking for multi-food and ingredients good products. So it's more alternative proteins available. In the area of digitalization, traceability, we have 2 projects now at the moment in this presentation. So in total, we have over 140 projects each year in EIT Food that we help to make a success. And the Link DAPA is a project where we work together to create and use multi-source data for crop management zones for precision agriculture. So highly digitalized agriculture. And the other one is a constituent sensing of small grains. So when you know of what constituents are in your food, e.g. proteins or carbohydrates, that's important for the nutritional value for the food producers and at the end for processing. During this current pandemic, which brings more challenges than we all had expected before, we were able to mobilize another 6 million for another innovation fund that is dedicated to COVID responses. And I did bring 2 examples, one in the area of circular food systems, one in the area of sustainable aquaculture. And one project is called Friends. And this is a dynamic pricing tool to reduce food waste in grocery stores and in retail stores. And the closer you are to the end date of the good, the cheaper it gets. So if you only go to buy daily food, you would have a cheaper price. If you would go for a good that you need in 3, 4, 5 days, you would have a more expensive good. So it's really helping to avoid waste and even give a price advantage for the consumer. The Sea Change project is a project I really like very much because I didn't think about that it is possible. So it's about seaweed, and in this project, seaweed is used to feed cattle, and which at the end reduces methane emissions from cattle and even increases the product quality. If you're interested in the projects, they're all on www.eitfood.eu, and every project is accessible, so you can have an insight there on our homepage. So the success of EIT Food innovation, we really believe that only if innovation, education, and business creation work together, innovation is faster to the market than before. And when the consumer is in the middle, we have a feedback loop if the projects are really successful in the end and can generate an impact. So we are building an inclusive and innovative community. We have a huge partner network. We will see in a few seconds how big it is. And we exchange with all of our experts and with the consumers. So it's farm to fork, business ideas to marketable products, and innovation to exploitation. And we are going to empower consumers to take an active part in the transformation of the food system. Co-creation is a tool every one of us is aware of, and this is really a good one to drive more resource-efficient, secure, trusted, and transparent food systems to the future and now. And it's all represented in the knowledge triangle, which is framed by public engagement, and we are out there on social media as well. For example, Food Unfolded is a platform where everyone out there can engage themselves and exchange opinions and learn about the future of food. So this is our partner network. As you can see, it's a heterogeneous mixture, and this is only the core partners that are really paying membership fees to be in EIT Food and to shape the future of food together, next to our project partners and next to our associates. And the core partners, they are economic actors, they are from higher education, and they are from RGO organizations. And startups, as one part of the knowledge triangle, are a really, really huge pillar of EIT Food. And we have an own association, they are called Rising Food Stars. And at the moment, this is comprised by 61 startups that are already as mature and on the way to small and medium enterprises. So this is mature startups. And on the other end of the startup areas, we are going to have seedbed programs. We have the Food Accelerator networks where each stage of startups is represented in EIT Food. And we have a lot of network partners from civil society, regional and public authority. And the presentation is available, and each of the partners can be accessed through the homepage as well. So my last slide is really a plea. If we want to change something, if we want to transform the food system, we want that, I think we need to work together. There's no other way. No one can solve the problems of today alone. We need to work together. If you're interested, connect with us on www.eitfood.eu and let's exchange and support the best innovations to future-proof our food system. Thank you very much. Happy to take questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Georg. I think I will perhaps share the first question that we received in reaction to your presentation. It's from Paul Hudman, who asks, what work is the EIT Food engaged in with regulators? And for instance, the move from primary feedstock to co-product streams and real biorefineries will require some flexibility in the approach of feedstock traceability, for instance. So when it comes to EIT Food and how you connect and discuss with regulators and interact with the regulatory framework, how does that work out?
So in terms of biorefineries, I may start with that one. We work closely together with the bio-based industries. This is another public-private partnership, and we have a project together started this year where we develop options to work together, and the side products and the residues and everything is part of the circular food systems approach we have. So there's a strong interaction. And yes, regulation is a big topic. I think you have dedicated a whole session this today, and there was a lot of experts on that. And at the moment, I'm honest, we have not really made own projects in terms of regulation because the product itself is always brought to the market from our partners. So we are not active in the market. And we started political discussions on with a political advisory board to touch base on that, but we have just started that. So the answer is, at the moment, we are focusing on alternatives in the markets based on innovations, but the regulation topic itself is a pretty young one. We are going to explore further on.
Thank you very much for this answer. As mentioned before, we will have a discussion after all the presentations. So if you have additional questions for Dr. Schirrmacher, then just keep them at hand, and we will come back to the whole discussion afterwards. With this, I'm moving on to the next speaker, who is Jonas from Nature's Fynd, which is a company that develops fungi-based proteins for meat substitutes, but he will tell us more about that. Thomas, the floor is yours.
Hi, thanks, Sandrine. Hi, everyone. So Nature's Fynd is a US-based company. So we are here in Chicago, and I'm talking to you from our headquarters in Chicago, which is actually located, kind of an irony of history. It's located exactly in what used to be the center of meat production in Chicago, the meat center of the US historically, and we're just in the old stockyard where the animal used to be processed. So that's where we're located. If you hear a little bit of an accent here, it's not because this is an Illinois accent. I'm actually French, so I'm a lost European on this side of the pound. So Nature's Fynd is a company that started from a research project for NASA. The goal of our research initially was to try to figure out if NASA was going to send a probe to a moon of Saturn or to Mars, what would be the environment in which it would make sense to look for life. So if you go to the methane lake of Titan, or if you go to the geysers of Enceladus, what sort of life should you think about, and how could life get organized in these environments that are very, very different than the one we have on the Earth? It's not an easy question to answer, because obviously we know life as a data point of one at this point in time in the universe. So it requires imagination. And so if you look at the geysers of Enceladus, for instance, which is one of the moons of Saturn that are shooting thousands of miles into space, and where some precursor of proteins have actually been identified, we thought a good place to go and look were a different type of geyser. The geysers on planet Earth in Yellowstone. So Yellowstone National Park, for those of you who are not familiar, is located in the northwest of the US. It's part of the Rocky Mountains. And the whole Yellowstone region is about half the size of Switzerland. And it is literally sitting on a huge lava chamber. So it's the biggest supervolcano region in the world. And as a result of this very unique geology, when the snow melts and gets into the ground, it gets heated and it goes through a bunch of geological stratas. And when these waters come back out, some of them can be very extreme compared to your regular stream. So this is a very pristine nature, and what we surveyed there was products of nature and evolution, but on a very different type of environment than the one that we are all familiar with. So we went to study one of the many springs in Yellowstone. There's about 14 to 15,000 of these springs. And the one we studied was very unique for a bunch of reasons. One of them is that it has a pH at about 2.5, which is roughly equivalent to your car battery level of pH. It's a very, very extreme environment, and typically it's not really conducive to life developing and thriving. But what happened across many thousands of years is something that I think should all make us hopeful, and it is that life finds a way. And even in this very extreme environment, across many, many, many thousands of years, some microbial species managed to develop strategies to adapt and survive and thrive in this extreme environment. And we discovered a bunch of new to the world microbial species, and one in particular, which was interesting for a bunch of reasons. So it happens to be a fungal organism. So depending on the language, and in some language in Europe, I know that the term would be mushroom to designate fungal organism. Saying it's a mushroom, of course, if you associate that with your crimini mushroom, is a little misleading. These things are microbial organisms. They are of the same branch of life, if you will, as the Crimini organism, but they are nonetheless fairly different in many ways. One of the things that's interesting as we think about microorganisms in general and fungal organisms in particular is to keep in mind that fungi separated from animals earlier than plant. What I mean by that is first the separation was between plants and the rest, and then we subdivided. So they're actually closer to us than they are to plants. So I know it's a little disconcerting to think that the mushroom is not as close to is closer to us than it is to a carrot, but that is the genetic reality of the tree of evolution. So this organism that we discovered is an interesting organism because it's an extremophile and it evolved in this very extreme environment, this very acidic environment. And as a result of that, it developed some specific tactics and strategies to survive that we then leverage in our fermentation process. So in many ways, think about it as an organism who is very good at surviving in an environment where a lot of other organisms are very bad at surviving. So de facto, we can create some sort of barrier to entry by just creating in our fermentation process an environment that's very attractive and where it can thrive. And in the same time, that environment becomes basically a barrier to entry to other organisms. So it also happens to be 50% protein, and it's a complete protein with all essential amino acids. Now, one of the things to keep in mind about protein, and I think it surprises people very often when I say that, but animals do not make protein. Animals, which mean the cow, which means the chicken, which means you and me, cannot literally make protein. We don't have the ability to put an amine bond between carbohydrate and create a protein. So a good way to think about the cow is to think of the cow really as a concentrator of protein. And the typical animal protein chain that we're familiar with is really using animals as concentrators. And that's one of the challenges in terms of efficiency. If you really think about it, the only ones who can make proteins are plants and microorganisms. So with that in mind, I think what we're doing here and what a lot of our friends in this space are doing is really coming up with a new protein platform. The same way you had soy as a protein platform, for instance, I think you will see microorganisms becoming a protein platform. And as some of the, as Nate mentioned earlier, there is a very large number of microorganisms which playing on the growth condition, and as we learn to cultivate this organism and as our science become better and better, I think we will be able to create a lot of different capabilities and functionalities around this organism and their byproducts as well. So fundamentally, what we're doing here is just a continuation of agriculture. We are cultivating living organisms for the purpose of harvesting the protein that they make. We do it in a different way. What we do here is using a product of nature. Our organism is actually a native strain. It's a native organism. It might be a little less familiar to us than a chicken or a cow, but it's nonetheless a product of nature. So what we get from our process is a mass. So that looks very much like a raw chicken breast. So what you have on the left here is a raw chicken breast. And what you have on the right is a piece of our organism that we cultivated in that very box for a few days. And so we just started with a fermentation media. We had a little bit of fermentation media. We put the inoculum, and after a few days, we harvest this. So this doesn't require extrusion. It is natively like this. So natively, it kind of has the texture of a raw chicken breast. And our technology enables very long fibers to build up in the process undisturbed. So the organism is a fusarium. So we named the organism Fusarium flavolapis, which means Yellowstone in Latin. For those of you who are not fluent in Latin, flavolapis means Yellowstone. And the commercial name is going to be Phi, from Fusarium, from Yellowstone. The thing that's interesting, as I mentioned earlier, is 50% protein. And I think it's something that is very relevant today, because the real resource going forward is going to be protein. There's going to be enough carbohydrates for everyone. There's going to be enough lipid for everyone. The efficiency of, or the lack of efficiency of our protein supply chain is really going to be the main challenge to feed 10 billion people in an efficient way. So that's where microorganisms, and especially ones that hone their skills at efficiency in a place where they had to be efficient, very efficient to survive, become very, very relevant. So 50% protein, complete protein, all essential amino acid in high concentration. And just if you look at branched chain amino acid, we have about 20 to 25%. So those are a very nice quality protein. They're also highly digestible. So the PDCAS of organism is about 0. It's about 93, 94. So it's a very, very digestible protein. And just as a reminder, beef would be about 88, right? So it's more digestible than that. One of the things that's really interesting, I think, with these organisms is that if you think about what people are missing, they are missing a lot of fibers in their diet today. The modern diet is not really conducive to getting your right amount of fiber. And one of the challenges with plant-based is you're really not working with plant, you're working with plant isolate. And so you strip out a lot of the fiber to get into just the fraction that you care about in many cases, which are the protein, and then you bring back from that powder, from that flour that you extracted, then you bring back texture and moisture, but you've really stripped out a lot of the rest. What we can do with fermentation is really bring this whole food to you. And that means that there is some really interesting fibers that are part of the mix here as well. And we think that's something that's very valuable. So the idea of nutrition density in these fermentation products, and in Phi in particular, is something that we think is going to be more and more relevant to consumer going forward. So we've been able to use Phi to do a wide range of products from meat alternative to dairy alternative. A big part of the development of the technology was to be able to make something that had texture, so that we could keep the texture or break the texture, but starting with the texture. And another important part of the development of the technology was to be able to be very neutral in flavor. And so that is very important because, first of all, protein don't really have much taste in themselves, as we know. But more importantly, it gives you the ability to get into many territories in terms of flavoring. And so that was not something that was a given from the get-go, because, as we mentioned earlier, there is lots of microorganisms. It doesn't mean that a lot of them taste good. Some of them will, some of them won't. So we had to work around the growth condition to get to something that was very neutral in flavor. But again, having from the get-go and from the harvesting stage something which is wet and something that has texture is very attractive. So we discussed earlier, Nate mentioned earlier, some of the intense activity that's going on today in fermentation. And I think the reason why fundamentally we're seeing this activity is really because of the efficiency of these processes. Our organisms are very, very, very efficient. And fundamentally, the challenge of the protein supply is its overall inefficiency. So I think that's where we will continue to see progress, not only from us, but from all the people that are participating in the industry. So we closed recent second round of funding, our B round, about in early March, just at the time. Actually, we closed our round of funding the very day the market, the financial market went down significantly. So just when COVID really started, and I think what we've seen, not just us, but a bunch of other raise that happened over the past few months, is that really the current environment only make the need for new food solution more urgent. And if anything, what we've seen from consumer sentiment, and we've been tracking consumer sentiment for a while, is an increase in acceptability. And let me just share one comment on this. I mentioned that we've been tracking consumer acceptability, and so when we started this quite a few years ago, having people eat microorganisms was not something that was it was a little bit of a long shot. So we've been asking consumer for a long period now. We found a very simple question. We say we found this microorganism. It's a fungi. We're very clear on what it is. It's part of the fungi family. We discovered in Yellowstone. We can cultivate it using a fraction of the resources and turn it into a bunch of products. Would you be interested in trying it? And we've asked this question on a very large scale through the internet to a lot of customers, potential customer, and we saw the number of people who were very interested, who said either yes, I'm very interested, or yes, I'm interested, and who want to try, grow significantly over the years. And just before the pandemic, we were at about 50% of the general American population saying yes, we're interested in trying. We redid this about 2 months into the pandemic, and we saw that number jump to 66%, so 2/3 of the American population. And just to put things in perspective, 2/3 of Americans, or pretty much anybody, any general population agreeing on anything, is a high bar. So it is absolutely fascinating to see the accelerated adoption that or acceptance that we see around these microbial products. And I think people understand. People are putting together the sort of conceptual break, so they understand fermentation. In the US, kombucha has been a very big. You can find kombucha drinks, teas everywhere, literally in any gas station or any 7-Eleven. So those things have really become much more common. And also the concept itself of alternative protein is something that consumers are grown much more familiar to. So we closed our round of funding, and it was co-led by two groups, one of them being Breakthrough Energy and the second one being Generation. So Breakthrough is a group that's led by Bill Gates, and Generation is a group that's chaired by Al Gore. We were also happy to have some of our historic shareholders, such as ADM, Danone, and 1955, continue to support us on this round. And so we are very excited to be here in Chicago, scaling up our technology. So you heard maybe a little bit of noise earlier, and that's literally the construction going on. I hope it's not going to disturb this conversation. So we're here in Chicago, and you can see actually in the background of this picture the Sears Tower in Chicago. So we're about 10-15 minutes from downtown Chicago, and I think this is really also something that's really interesting about fermentation technology. You are able to make these things happen regardless of the weather, regardless of growth condition. Pretty much, you recreate your own growth condition. So we are able to make this protein here in Chicago, and we're using, of course, a fraction of the resources that traditional animal protein manufacturing would use. So we have one of the things that's very important, of course, and is how do you talk to consumer about these new products, and how do you bring this novelty into something that is not just a novelty, but it's really something that makes sense for consumer. I think people are going to be surprised to see how good this product can actually taste. I think that will be a shock to a lot of consumers. But bringing the idea that fermentation can be not just something that you use to make wine, not just something you use to make soy sauce, not just something you use to make bread, but something that can really be an active part of your new protein diet is something that remains to be done. So we put together we have a short movie that we'd like to share with you that shows you a little bit how we are talking about this. So you might have a window that opens.
It all started in a volcano. Millions of years ago, actually, when a remarkable little microbe was born. And while it lived there undiscovered, the world's population kept growing and growing, as did our impact on the planet. Until suddenly, feeding everyone wasn't guaranteed. But when a group of explorers, scientists, and optimists doing research for NASA discovered the microbe, it turned out to be uniquely remarkable. A new source of nutritious protein the world had never seen before. So the scientists got curious. The explorers hypothesized. The optimists wondered. And inspired by nature's own technology, they invented a new way of fermentation and created Phi, a complete protein with all 20 amino acids. Perfect for making all kinds of really delicious, nutrition-packed foods. Perfect for feeding anyone, anywhere, anytime, without the need for sun, rain, or soil. Perfect for feeding all 8 billion of us, and future generations of us's. And making Phi uses just a tiny fraction of the land, water, and energy that traditional protein uses. Which means together, we can give the earth a breather. Let it rest, rebuild, even be renewed. From finding a microbe to feeding the whole globe. This is the story of nature's find, and we can't wait to meet all 8 billion of you.
All right. Well, thanks for watching this, and it's on this video is on YouTube. If you feel free to share it to the world if you want to, or watch it again. It was fun to put this together, and one of the funny thing is actually one of the person who was eating some of our chicken nugget we're shooting this little video didn't know that they were not made out of chicken. It was absolutely just couldn't believe that those were not chicken, actual chicken products. So I think there will be a lot of surprise from consumer when they see the very wide range of product that you can get from fermentation.
Thank you very much, Thomas, also for this inspiring video. I do have a few questions for you, but I think that they will also be relevant for other speakers. So if you don't mind me keeping them for the end. And I think Paul also has a question that is similar to one of mine. So we will keep them for the last bit, and I will directly pass it on to Eden Barrier, who is our last speaker and who is CEO at Atlast Food, which makes plant-based meat to reduce the environmental impact of animal agriculture. But he will tell us more about that. Eben, please.
Hi, great to be here. Thanks, everyone. Just going to give my slides a second to come up. And if everyone else can see them, let me know, and we can do the thing where you advance them.
It's loading.
Thank you. I can see them now, so I'm gonna jump in. Hopefully that's good for everyone at home.
Go ahead.
Great. Thank you. I started Atlast Food Co. Atlast Food Co. is a spin-out of a company I founded about 10 years ago called EFIB, which is a world leader in mycelium-based materials. At Atlast, we're taking some of the technology we developed at EFIB to create other animal products like skin, which is used in the leather industry, and we're applying it to create whole cuts of meat. And basically, the primary hypothesis or thesis behind Atlast is there's a secret, and it's called the forager's secret. I'm advancing my slides. They're not changing. Are they advancing for everyone else?
Yes, they are.
Great. So, great. Forager's secret is simple. It's something that humans have known for hundreds of years. We've learned it. We've forgotten it. But essentially, the forager's secret is nature's already created some of the best plant-based meats and the best plant-based whole cuts of chicken, beef, fish, what have you. And these are gourmet mushrooms. They've been eaten for many years. They're often found in forests. They take 8 to 12 weeks to grow. They're rarely commercially cultivated, and when they are, they're pretty expensive. But they're known in really high-end restaurants as almost perfect facsimiles of animal-based meat, and they end up in really compelling dishes. And so this is the forager's secret. And what we're doing at Atlast is taking these gourmet mushrooms from nature. We're not doing any genetic engineering on them. You can think of what we do as like advanced domestication. So just as we captured corn from the wild thousands of years ago, we're capturing these gourmet mushrooms, and we're industrializing the growth process, taking it from 12 weeks to 10 days, and taking the cost envelope from something that really fits in a high-end restaurant to something you'd see in your typical retail aisle. The other half of this is a market opportunity. So when I was surveying this space 2 or 3 years ago and thinking about where unmet needs were, whole cut meat just stood out at me. There's all this excitement around ground burgers and ground sausage, beyond and impossible, but no one was really addressing the whole cut space. And given the economics, 80 or 90% of all volume is whole cuts of meat, and about 80 or 90% of all the value is in whole cuts of meat. And if you look at the dynamic range of pricing, most of the margin is on the higher end of whole cuts of meat. It just seemed like that there was a really big unmet need in this space that consumers would be connecting to. And that also pairs with consumers' demand for whole foods. So those are kind of the two elements we brought together at Atlast. We then prototyped lots of different whole cuts of meat during our Feast of the Futures we held. So we did sushi dishes for fish, we did chicken sandwiches, we even did a carb-free dessert. We've really dialed in on a single launch product though. Our super ingredient can support lots of whole cuts of meat, but we wanted to come to market with something that was super tangible, both for ourselves to show ourselves what's possible and also to show the market. And so we really zeroed in on the pork market specifically. About 90% of all the pork sold is whole cuts, and then within this category, there's a product that people just can't give up, especially people who are trying to eat less meat. And we've heard this again and again from consumers, and it's bacon. And so bacon is a whole cut. It's hard to make a compelling bacon using extrusion technologies, which is what you do if you were using either other types of fermentation or other plant-based ingredients. And the market data bears that out. In a $4.5 billion retail market in the US last year, there were about $30 million of plant-based bacon sold. So that whole category just strikes us as ripe for disruption, much like the veggie burger market was 10 or 15 years ago. I'm going to keep advancing. I'm on slide 5. They're not advancing on my end. I'll just take it on confidence everyone else sees them. So we're releasing our first product. It's called Atlast Bacon. We think of it as bacon without the oink. We worked a lot to make this just a really delicious, compelling product, and also looking at what consumers wanted beyond good flavor, right? And so next on that list is nutrition, and then not a lot of processing. So something we've heard again and again in our consumer studies is people want whole foods, they want simple ingredient levels, and much of the technological trends I see around fermentation right now, and some of the next generation products that are coming out are actually getting more complicated labels. So it's taking more and more processing and more ingredients to kind of replicate that whole meat experience. And so what we're trying to do with the Atlast super ingredient and with our bacon is take that back a step. 80 or 85% of all the work, I'll call that work, texturally, flavor, nutrition, in this product is being done by a single ingredient. That's the Atlast super ingredient. And then there's just a couple of other ingredients: coconut oil, organic sugar, sea salt, beet choice, and natural flavors that give it that bacon experience. And so this is a really, I think, especially for a whole meat, plant-based meat, but any plant-based meat, it's a particularly clean label and something we're really proud of. So going back to the business question, why wouldn't you just do this with these gourmet mushrooms? why not go into nature, either cultivate them in an improved process or collect them? And the reality is super expensive to do. Some of these are just have really long growth cycles to produce the fruiting body you'd associate with a mushroom, like 8 to 12 weeks. And then the geometry is just wrong. So you get a mushroom shape, you end up with foods that are shaped like mushrooms. And then even over the physiology of a fruiting body, you have a stipe, which is basically the stalk, and you have a cap, which is known as the pileus. You see a whole bunch of different tissue types across that mushroom. So if you were to section a mushroom up and eat bits of it, each one would have different texture elements, and each one may have different flavor elements. So what we're doing in our process is essentially managing all of those different phenotypes, so those different textures you might see or different flavors, and expressing just the one we want from that gourmet mushroom species in an industrialized slab. And so the image on the right is an oyster mushroom, common oyster mushroom, growing in nature on a tree. The image on the left is a slab of that same tissue grown aerially in our process. And that slab is like somewhat larger than an encyclopedia, if you think of it in terms of format. And then those slabs can be grown hundreds of feet long, 4 or 5 feet wide, in existing equipment from the button mushroom industry. The key here is we're able to dial in on the textural element, the nutritional elements, and the flavor elements of these gourmet species of mushrooms with very little post-processing. So this is just a cross-section through one of those slabs. We're zoomed in here, but you can see how the mycelial fibers align in 3D space and create that meat-like texture. And by modifying our growth environment, predominantly what we feed the organism and the environment we put it in, we're able to really tease out different textural elements from a single strain. And so we have a fair amount of tunability within a single organism. And then again, we can prospect in nature. There's about 20 gourmet mushrooms found in nature that we can prospect in and have different textural elements. In terms of making our bacon, video, I'm gonna skip this just because they've been slow today. It's very simple. As I mentioned, you start with a whole ingredient, one of these slabs, you slice it up, you effectively marinate these slices in some of the ingredients, and that becomes the finished product, which you would fry up in your own kitchen. And so just a shot of that growing right now, or cooking right now, after growth. This is Atlast bacon, frying on a frying pan. You don't add any oil. It comes with its own fat infused into it. It cooks up like bacon. It crisps up like bacon. We think it has a really great presentation. So, in terms of the business model for Atlast Food Co., we've oriented this as a B2B company. We think there's a ton of money and time and effort that's been going into create great plant-based brands that consumers trust. That's awesome. There's a place for that. We just see ourselves having the biggest impact by taking advantage of the brands that have been built and providing these folks with a new super ingredient. We see a pathway to scale to 100 million pounds of production over the coming 5 years using existing button mushroom infrastructure. And this scaling gives us scaling this equipment means we can support multiple partners at once. So in a nutshell, we are going to sell the super ingredient to CPGs. We'll work with them on development. On the foundry side of our business, we can bring new strains into our foundry. We can bring new textural or flavoral elements out. While we're initially building our own capacity, we do plan to long-term contract manufacture with existing button mushroom farms. So there's like 1 billion pounds of installed capacity in the United States for button mushroom farms and billions of pounds installed in Europe and Asia. We're building a plant right now that is built by one of these Dutch mushroom farm construction firms. So they've built all these plants around the world and uses about 80 or 90% of the same equipment. There are specialized parts of our processes. So there are conversion steps that might have to happen, particularly around what we call pre-treatment of the precursor materials. But ultimately, we think we can reuse a lot of this production infrastructure. And this infrastructure is actually under even more pressure since COVID hit, since most of the white button mushrooms go into food service and retail outdoor dining. So there is capacity. Just zooming out a little bit again, why are we doing this? A couple elements. Just this huge unmet need for what we think of as food scaffolding in the industry. So going back to our thesis, whole cuts, 80% of value, 80% of volume. There aren't a lot of great technical solutions that address that space. Folks are here today. We know this is a hot market. I have been using the phrase durable cultural vector. So my belief is that in 10 or 15 years, like the path we are all on and talking about today will be the path a lot more people in the world are on. I've also heard this called product zeitgeist fit. And I think that's particularly true for plant-based meats and then actually whole cuts of plant-based meat. I think it's a very natural evolution of where the market goes and what consumers will want. I believe that mycelium can uniquely serve in this space. I think there's lots, and we've heard some of it today, of great work using these organisms in the fungal kingdom to create proteins. And I think they can do something really special that hasn't been addressed yet, which is actually grow the textural elements that mimic whole cuts of meat. And I see this as a sweet spot between what folks are trying to do in cellular agriculture, which is effectively grow whole muscle meat, and what we're doing in a lot of fermentation, which is essentially spit out small molecules or biomass, grind it up, and use existing extrusion technology to try and create these whole cut analogs. And so I think filamentous mycelium particularly can sit in this uncanny valley where they can produce a lot of the elements you'd find from actually growing whole muscle meat. This is a difficult problem. Most of what I've shared with you today is product validated. So we have a product with regulatory clearance. It's ready to go. We'll be selling it on the market shortly. And what remains is scale up. And that is always a difficult but always solvable problem. And as a mechanical engineer, it's one of my favorite things to do. I'll wrap on that. I guess the last thing I would say is for those interested in the audience, either on the partnering side or the investment side, we'd love to speak to you. We'll be in stores this fall, and we'll be rolling out in North America next year. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eben. It was very interesting also to see the different steps of developing this process. And perhaps, so first of all, to the participants, if you have questions you would like to address to the different speakers, please feel free to use that below. To the first question, which I think is relevant to, well, for many of you, and which is, what are the biggest challenges that you see or that you have experienced recently when I have my microphone on now. Can you hear me again?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I hope the problem is solved. So the question, in case you didn't hear, was what are the biggest challenges that you've encountered or that you anticipate in the area of fermentation or plant-based innovation?
I would just
Eden,
build
can
on
you
my
still hear us?
Yeah, I would build on my prior point, which is I think from my view at Atlast Food Co. and what I understand from others in the space, I think there's some really great products that have been developed to.
Might be speaking, but I can't hear you.
Okay. Okay, I'll finish, and who hears me hears me. And just say, I think scale is the next step. So creating prototypes is hard, but easier than scale up. And I think a lot of folks have some really interesting, exciting, and hopefully like super productive and successful scale up journeys ahead of them. And that's where the action impact is anyways.
Sandrine, I don't know if you can hear me.
Yes.
I think it's coming back slowly.
Hello? Yes?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah, no, I would agree with Eben. I would add one thing, which is going forward and thinking about all this many microorganisms that we could farm in the future. I think it's going to require some change in regulatory perspective. Of course, that has to be done very, very carefully, but I think it is very important that the legislator take that into consideration. And candidly here, one of the challenge here that was actually explained to me by a US senator is that existing regulations are meant for two things. One of them is to protect consumer, and the second one is to prevent new entrants. And I think we have to be, JFI in the US has done a fantastic work at really federating and making sure we're addressing these regulatory aspects in a common voice. But I think it's going to be very important across the world to do something similarly. This is an extension of traditional farming technology, and there is some newness in it. There is also a lot of very ancient technique that we're leveraging. So it's not I think there is a lot of ways today to do what we do, obviously, in a very safe manner. This is not something that should be extremely complicated to regulate appropriately.
So maybe one thought that I would like to share is that you were talking about upscaling, and I think it's an important step in an environment of a new company. And I believe that the alternatives that are out there and the ideas, there's huge ideas out there and a lot of ideas there. And usually the next hurdle from lab to upscale is the biggest. It's not only about regulation, for sure, that's one of the most important things as well, to enter a market, but I think to have the product ready for product testing and for regulation, that's maybe the biggest hurdle I see at the moment.
And Georg, on that, I think in Europe there is a lot of talk about Green Deal and supporting some of these new technologies, which fermentation is definitely one of them that can reduce the global impact of our food chain. We are dealing with scale up here, and as I mentioned, you might hear some of the noise. But fundamentally, what is true as well is that we're dealing at a deeper level with an existing capacity, right? I mean, traditional agriculture has been around for a long time, and a lot of the capacity is already amortized. Whereas for us, we all have, Eben, us, and all the other players, we have to create this capacity and bring that to life. And there's no question that this is going to require some capital, and this is one of the reasons where we're seeing this large raise happening right now. The playing field is not even, right? We are going against existing, established, and fully amortized other production capacity in protein. So it's going to take us a little bit of time to scale these things up. But fundamentally, I think the efficiency that is on the side of fermentation should really help with the economics. And I think we will see the benefit of that in terms of cost from a lot of different companies. So I'm fairly optimistic on the outcome.
What do you think would be needed to even the playing field? If you have already answered that point, apologies, I couldn't hear everything you said before.
I mean, I think the only thing that evens the playing, I think there's two things. First of all, there is time. As we build these things, there's more capacity, and Eben was sharing some of their capacity, expectation over time, and I think that's super exciting for the field. I mean, it's great to see these capacities being built up, because fundamentally, the consumer will be the one making the decision. And fundamentally, what we're doing is about bringing new choices to consumers. And I think what we're seeing, especially with the younger generation, it's true in the US, but my understanding is that it's just as true in Europe, if not more, is that this younger generation really wants to align the way they purchase whatever it is that they purchase and their food, among many other things, with their set of values. And whether it's blocking London, whether it's the Greta movement, I mean, all of these things demonstrate that the younger generation in Europe and in the US, but also in other places of the world, take these things very seriously. I mentioned the consumer sentiment earlier and the work that we've done. The data that I share was around general American population, right? But when we zoom on the younger consumer, this is much stronger. So there is a generational change that's happening in which younger consumer really want to change the way they eat, and they are very concerned about environmental impact. So I think we have to taste good, we have to be healthy, and I think if we meet all of these criteria and we can have a fraction of the environmental impact, then why wouldn't you as a consumer adopt our products? And it's true for our products, it's true for Eben's product, and I think it's true for all the fermentation product. I think those are very fundamental things that drive the sector.
I think it's not only the products we have seen today, it's about all the alternatives that are out there. So you need to make them available for the consumer, and this is one of the biggest hurdles we have, to have this choice in the supermarkets, that they can go for a more sustainable, for more healthy, and for a more available product. At the moment, there's not enough choice at the moment, and that's one thing we are going to push for, to bring the alternatives faster to the market and have them then prove their market readiness as well. Yeah? Because it's one thing is to have it in the market, and the other thing is to get your product bought in the market. Sandrine, you're muted.
And do you already have I couldn't catch the end of your sentence, but do you have already ideas within EIT Food how to address this consumer choice and availability of alternatives?
I mean, when you look at the rising food stars out there, it's 61 at the moment, startups that are moving from a startup or scale up to a small and medium enterprise, and they all have products in the market at the moment. And scaling them up is the most pressing thing at the moment, to make them really available for earning their own money, to grow substantially and grow sustainable in economic terms. And when they're out there, that's the thing that needs to be thought through. If they're out there, how to make them persistent. And it's not about, I think it's not about one single technology. I think there will be a huge heterogeneous market out there. We will eat meat in the future as well, but maybe less meat than today. And we will have alternatives out there that help to decline the consumption of meat. And it's like in the energy sector for the vehicles we drive. I think this will not be happening in 10 years. It needs time, as Thomas says. I think we need time to transform this market. And when you look back to the people smoking cigarettes, I think it took over 25 years to decrease the number of people smoking cigarettes. And I think it's a comparison that it's not the same product, for God's sake, but I think it's the same process that we need to initiate to educate and transform the consumer habits.
Thank you. Perhaps a last question, because people are dropping out also, and we're a bit over time. What did you experience specific problems or issues regarding access to finance and to the market before scale up? Or was that rather the easiest part?
So for us, funding was, we were in a position where we had the opportunity to have a lot of interest, and so there was we were pretty massively oversubscribed on our last round of funding. So this put us in a situation where, and I think it's going to continue to an extent, where we can really make sure that we align the sources of funding with the mission that we have. and make sure that we get people on board who can really help us get there, and who want to have the impact that we want to have on global warming and on building up the future of food. So I think Nate, and for those of you who have not seen the GFI report, I strongly recommend reading it. It's a phenomenal compiling of everything that's happening in the fermentation industry. And it's really the first time that it has been put together the way Nate and the team did that. But you can see really the very rapid ramp up. And fundamentally, I think the reason we see that, and I'm getting back to what I was saying earlier, it's the current inefficiency in the protein system. And if there is one thing that market hates, is market hate inefficiencies. That's a very basic rule of economy, right? Market hate inefficiency. And I think what we have are more efficient ways, again, of making protein. We're not using a concentrator as an intermediate. We're directly assembling the protein. And I think that's what is driving a lot of the funding that we're seeing in this space today.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Nate, would you like to add something to that, or Eben, before dropping out?
Yeah, I would just say, I think, echo that the opportunity is recognized by the investor space, and that there's a lot of capital flowing in this direction.
I can't hear you. I hope everyone else can.
I can hear Eben.
Yes, we can hear.
Perfect.
Yeah, and there's a lot. I think it doesn't mean you need to have something that's investable and makes sense and is like a solid business plan. But I think capital access is possible. With Atlast, like, we're going into this with the full knowledge that, like, CEO don't know a lot about the food sector. Our way of addressing this was to put together a really great active board. So I have two food entrepreneurs who are lead investors in our $7 million seed round. Stephen McDonald, who founded Applegate Farms, sold to Hormel for $700 or $800 million a few years ago, and Gary Hirschfield, who started Stonyfield Yogurt, as well as some leading plant-based investors. So we were trying at the very top to bring in expertise at the board level, and then hopefully set the stage for larger capital raises as we move forward and need that to hit scale.
I'll just really quickly add, I don't think early stage funding has been a problem. I think the emphasis now would be more and more like stage B plus funding to fund that scale up that we've been talking about. So need more banks, family offices, established companies involved. But really, it hasn't been a constraint.
Maybe one comment to that from my side. I think for the Americas, it's easier than in Europe still. We need more risk-affine people and ventures that do invest in startups. I think we still have not the same situation than in the US. We are still having reluctant investors that are, even when food is now growing and the ventures are more aware about the food system, but I think it's still a long way to go that we have the same situation than in America.
Well, thank you very much for your thoughts and for this discussion. Unfortunately, we have to wrap it up, but it's been insightful and very interesting to have you all today to discuss innovation and fermentation. You will, most of you will be available for the breakout sessions, so that will be through Jitsi, and I think I just have to thank you all for joining today, and I will pass it on to the EFIB team again.
Yeah, thank you for having us here. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.